Most people think the Mongol Empire was an unstoppable force of nature, a black death on horseback that only stopped when their great Khan died. We are taught that their horse archers were invincible, their logistics flawless, and their cruelty a strategic masterstroke that forced the world to its knees. But this narrative ignores the structural limits of empire. The hidden truth is that the greatest land empire in history didn't just stop, it was broken. It wasn't broken by a superior ideology or a bigger army, but by a systemic failure to adapt to the very ground beneath their feet. In 1260, at a spring called Ain Jalut, a group of warrior slaves realized that the Mongols were ant gods. They were just commuters whose vehicles were breaking down. This is the story of how the ground itself became a weapon, and how a forgotten architect named Baibars turned the Mongols' own blueprint for victory into a roadmap for their extinction. By 1258, the old world was in a state of terminal collapse. The Abbasid Caliphate, centered in the jewel of Baghdad, had stood for half a millennium as the peak of human achievement. It was a world of libraries, astronomy, and systemic prestige. But prestige is a poor shield against a balanced sheet of terror. When the Mongols arrived, they didn't just conquer. They deleted. Baghdad was erased in days, its libraries turned into black ink in the Tigris. The status quo failed because it relied on the common solutions of the time, high walls and divine right. But the Mongols operated on a different logic of survival. They were the closest thing the medieval world had to modern air cavalry. Each warrior traveled with up to 7 remounts, allowing them to cover 60 miles a day, twice the speed of any other army. They had no supply lines to cut because they lived off the land and, in desperate times, the blood of their own horses. This was the logistical infrastructure of an unstoppable machine. The world was effectively a flat, open steppe for them to gallop across. But as they pushed toward the Mediterranean, the machine began to hit a friction point that the raw data of their previous victories couldn't account for. The hidden strategy that finally crushed the horde wasn't found in a textbook. It was etched into the rocky soil of the Levant. Enter Baibars, a Mamluk general who had been sold into slavery and risen through a brutal military meritocracy. He understood the logic of the steppe because he was born there. He saw what most missed. The Mongol war machine had a geological expiration date. Syria and Palestine were not the soft grasslands of Mongolia. They were rocky, semi-arid, and brutal on unshod hooves. While the Mongols relied on tough but barefoot ponies, the Mamluks used iron horseshoes. This seemingly minor detail was a massive technological gap. On the rocky slopes of the Jezreel Valley, a barefoot Mongol pony was a liability. A shod Mamluk horse was a weapon. Baibars' blueprint for victory was a masterpiece of asymmetric warfare. He knew the Mongols needed vast quantities of grass, roughly 400,000 pounds a day, for a standard force. By using a scorched earth policy and luring them into the narrow valley of Ain Jalut, he turned their mobility against them. He executed a pattern interrupt by using the Mongols' own favorite move, the feigned retreat. He led them into a triangular kill box where the hills negated their flanking maneuvers. Then he introduced the ultimate disruptor, early hand cannons. These midfa didn't kill many men, but the gunpowder explosions terrified the Mongol horses, who had never heard such a sound. The disciplined Mongol units collapsed into a chaotic melee where the Mamluks' heavier armor and shod horses dominated. The invincible horde was physically and logistically outmatched on a battlefield that had been engineered to fail them. The tragedy of execution lies in what happened after the dust settled. The man who orchestrated this brilliant defense, Sultan Kutus, didn't live to see the fruits of his labor. He was assassinated by Baibars just weeks after the victory, a reminder that the vacuum of power left by the Mongols was immediately filled by the same ruthlessness that had just defeated them. This victory was also modified by history. The Mongols didn't just leave. They were consumed by a systemic civil war between their own factions, as the Golden Horde in Russia allied with the Mamluks against their own kin. The dream of a global Mongol hegemony was sacrificed on the altar of internal politics and regional logistics. The plan to conquer Egypt was never beaten in a single afternoon. It was rendered impossible by a world that had finally learned the blueprints of resistance. Today, the modern shadow of Ain Jalut is everywhere. We see it in the way modern superpowers struggle with asymmetric warfare in mountainous or urban terrain. The instincts of this forgotten history tell us that technology and numbers are irrelevant if you do and control the infrastructure of the environment. History isn't a story of winners and losers. It is a study of the underlying structures, geography, logistics, and resource management that outlive us all. The Mongols were the masters of the world, but they were defeated by a horseshoe and a handful of rocky hills.